Again, thanks for the wonderful music this morning that so enriches our time together. Humans are storytellers. Many of our indigenous ancestors and current siblings would add that we are not unique in that way. Do whales gather in their pods to tell stories? I'd like to think they do, but today I'm going to stick to us pesky humans. As far back as we know, our development has depended on stories. Without the ability to share an idea, a vision, a desire, a story arising within a human brain, virtually nothing can be accomplished. Stories may also be efforts to tell the unembellished truth about something that happened so that we can share a common understanding of reality. Or they may be about entirely fictional events with fictional characters, often illustrating, we hope, a greater truth about who we are or would like to be with each other. Or they may be somewhere in between fact and fiction, sometimes with hidden agendas, often hidden even from the speaker, or full of self-serving objectives, steeped in denial of implications and consequences. I'm not a postmodernist. I do believe there is a truth with a capital T. That truth is not relative, that if two ideas completely contradict each other, they can't both be true. But truth remains conditional. What seems to be scientifically proven and thus true at one point in history can be shown false by new evidence. Because we are limited by time and space, a life barely long enough to reach conclusions any of us can dare to live by confidently, and because we are not infinitely intelligent, ultimate truth will always be an elusive story, something we chase but never quite catch. But what I seek to address today is more in the realm of the immediate, the realm we all live in, like it or not, the realm we face in this new year, 2025, and the stories that we will need to navigate it. Our stories matter, as Santana pointed out, because they create who we are. The question we must ask is not necessarily if our stories are true, but do they empower us? Do they help us create a happier life for ourselves, for our loved ones, for our communities, for humanity as a whole? A life without genocide, war, poverty, exploitation, or bigotry? A life where we can all thrive in ways sustainable for future generations? To illustrate the power of stories, I'd like to share a personal realization. It's about a story I had that was both false and disempowering. I'm 69 years old, and many of us may have a story along the lines of the old cliche that you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Well, I don't know much about dogs, but my experience demonstrates that we humans are capable of breakthroughs at any age. In my mid-60s, I went through a transformative experience. I found out I met the diagnostic criteria for what used to be called Asperger's syndrome, now referred to as autism level 1, a condition characterized by atypical, often rigid thought processes and difficulties reading, understanding, and interacting with others. I worked with a therapist for 2 years who specializes in this condition and spent a year in a support group for autistic professional adults. I learned many things I had never known, all of which have helped me become far more effective, confident, caring, and generous. But there was one that stands out above all the others. You see, I had this story about categorical statements. I spent a lot of time in the principal's office as a kid because every time a teacher made a categorical statement, I had to raise my hand to point out the obvious exceptions or to ask how the teacher knew there weren't exceptions. Now, I didn't do this because I was a precocious, spoiled brat, the usual explanation, but because I was genuinely confused. I wanted the truth. Other kids seemed to have been born with an instruction book I never received. Somehow they seemed to be okay with falsehood, as did most adults. But why were people so at ease with statements that didn't make sense to me, that were in many cases just flat out wrong, such as racial and gender stereotypes that condemned others to second-class status? I never figured it out, but I did get tired of being punished and ridiculed, so I learned to shut up and tried to be a groveling people pleaser much of my life. It didn't work well. I was just too anxious, defensive, and excessively apologetic, not able to fully hide my resentment and envy under a veneer of shy, self-deprecating niceness. I wanted to scream every time I heard someone say, "Stop taking it personally." But I thought, if I'm in a category you're criticizing, and I belong to many of the most hated categories there are, how could you not be attacking me? Besides, it wouldn't be moral to exempt myself. If I'm in the category, I must be guilty as charged, even if I can't figure out where I failed. You know, UU ministry education was kind of a hell for me, since much of it focused on critiquing every privileged identity one could possess. Being given no possibility to ever be absolved from condemnation attributed categorically to my identities posed an unsolvable contradiction so painful that I remember one day getting in my car and spontaneously driving to Los Angeles and back, stopping only for gas and restrooms in a nonstop panic attack. Yet somehow I muddled through, yet still not understanding why others didn't have the same reactions. So what changed? My therapist taught me that categorical statements aren't absolutes. That's it. At most, they are generalities, averages, or trends. Thus, my colleagues who criticized identities they belonged to themselves weren't the immoral hypocrites I thought they were. My fellow students who calmly accepted categorical identity critiques weren't faking that calmness. Unlike me, the story they heard was this: well, a lot of X people do Y, which is bad. So, if I'm an X, I need to be vigilant about not doing Y, and to remind my fellows to do the same, especially when they fall short. And because I'm working on it, I'm one of the good guys. I don't need to be ashamed. Perhaps unlike that Millie over there who can't handle admitting she is fallible and deserves to be called out for her insufferable fragility. They didn't know I had a story different from theirs. I didn't know they had a story different from mine. My story that categorical statements were absolute was both untrue and disempowering. And yet, if just one person throughout my life had asked why I found such statements so distressing, had wondered if something else might be going on rather than assuming immoral entitlement, I might have learned this far earlier in life. How many misunderstandings, hardships, breakups, and defeats could have been avoided for them as well as for me? So we have been facing an existential crisis for a long time. But today, in 2025, it has become immediate, open, and obvious. There are no guarantees that those of us who have not already been taken out by it will survive this crisis. Ask those still alive in Gaza, for example. And an honest assessment could indicate that the human story might be coming to an end within the lifespans of many of you in this room. But is that an empowering story? I believe not, because to say it's too late or too hard ensures only that we will fail. Such a story is more likely to empower resignation and despair than to inspire action. Perhaps even support a moral smugness about the human story being so horrendously cruel and destructive that it is fully worthy of a final chapter of good riddance. I say no, because the human story is my story, your story, the stories that allowed our ancestors to survive against all odds, the stories of friendship and solidarity, of courage and love, of redemption and transformation, not only of horror. Analogous to the breakthrough that occurred for me on a tiny single human scale, the whole human story might still allow a collective breakthrough, one where we realize that our stories about who we are and who others are have been disempowering and self-defeating for all of us. Today, we need more than ever stories that inspire action, inclusion, compassion, and defiance. Now, I'm not asking that we try to shift our stories about those whose greed and bigotry would lead us into some fascistic nightmare. We each have limited time and energy. Like one story says, it makes more sense to plant seeds in an already fertile field than in a sterile one. Rather, I am asking that we organize to enroll others in our visions, that we don't write off those whose differences merely frustrate or annoy us, that we confront our own assumptions and actions when we fail to achieve the results we want, and that when faced with obstacles, we cultivate curiosity and humility more than self-righteousness or envy. We must inspire each other to come up with a collective plot twist for the human story. We must ensure a new volume gets to be written. Success will take millions of us, not all writing the same words or on the same page, yet mutually honoring the stories of our transformative journeys toward liberation. Let's begin. Thank you.